A little bit more about what the business community can do and what they are doing to try to step up to address inequality and justice. We're joined by Lewin. She's the co-founder and managing partner of Ethical Ventures. It's a management consultancy. Lisa's also the co-author of the Business for Racial Equity Pledge, which since launching last week has now gained more than 1,000 signatures from CEOs and executives across the country. And good morning to you, and thanks for joining us. Tell us about this pledge before we get into maybe some of the larger issues taking place across this country.
Well, first, thank you, Andrew, for having me and for making space on your show for important conversations like this. So the Business for Racial Equity Pledge, the seeds of it started a couple of weeks ago during the nationwide protests and outpouring of grief over the death of George Floyd and every other Black life cut prematurely short by a fatal encounter with the police. And so, look, I've been a business executive for 25 years, a senior operating executive and an advisor to C-suite leaders and boards. And so I've seen my fair share of PR polished thoughts and prayers type statements come out. And that's what I expected. And instead, as you just shared, it seems like this time is a little different. The statements were bolder and leaders are starting to make commitments that show that they're ready for real change. So I gathered a group of other executives, all members of a group called the Leadership Now Project. It's a group of mostly Harvard Business School graduates and leaders that are interested in the health of our democracy and society. And together we wrote this pledge, and it covers 3 areas where businesses who want to walk the walk and not just talk the talk around racial justice, things that they can pursue, specifically in the areas of policing, voting, and economic inclusion.
And so, you talk about getting beyond the press release. What do you think that really is going to look like? And how are you going to measure the commitments that so many of these signatories have now made?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, I'll talk a little bit about what's in the pledge and why we put it there. So, right up front, we have an ask for business around policing, which is we want businesses to use their considerable clout and sway that they have as job creators and as contributors to the political landscape to get things like police reform and accountability on the agenda. That is where, at the state level and the local level, where these issues and where laws around public safety and law enforcement are made, and business can have a very big voice there. The second area is really in voting. We're asking for business to really put pressure on states to ensure safe access to the ballot box. Listen, since the Voting Rights Act was gutted a few years back, it's actually been getting harder, Andrew, in a lot of states for people to vote, especially for Black voters to vote. And that's been made all the much harder now in this pandemic. Just look at states like Wisconsin and Georgia, where, on the other hand, since Citizens United, it's actually getting easier and easier for businesses to really have meaningful influence on public policy. So, one of our beliefs is that, as regular people feel like they have less and less say at the ballot box, they're going to be turning to business even more because they know that they have influence to sway on issues that they care about, whether that's racial justice, climate change, gun control, and everything else. So we want businesses to step up to protect everybody's right to vote. And then the last part of the pledge is really asking for businesses to double down on areas of diversity, equity, and inclusion. These are things that are already on a lot of companies' radars. And if they're not on your radar, they should be. And this is about, diverse hiring practices and board diversity. And if you're an investor, looking at your investment capital and seeing how much of it is going to Black entrepreneurs, how much of it is going to Black fund managers, Black venture capitalists, like the guest that you had on earlier in your show. So, so that's within the pledge. That's what we're asking for businesses to do. And like you said, we've been really heartened to see incredible support from across the business community in finance, media, tech, real estate. I think people are really hungry for change.
Lisa, let me ask you this, though. I consider this, and I think you consider this, an apolitical issue, the things that you just laid out. And yet all of them, to some degree, are political. And some CEOs worry about the politics. We just were talking in the last segment about how the CEO of the AMC Cinemas thinks wearing a mask or requiring people to wear a mask is political. And so the question is how far you think CEOs can go and what you would tell them about the politics of this.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, look, there's a difference between an issue being politicized and an issue being political. To me, something as simple as public health should not be political. And, you mentioned, my work, I run a strategy consulting firm that helps leaders make these kinds of decisions. And one of the things that we say to them is, driving for business performance doesn't mean checking your good judgment and your common sense and your values at the door. So that's one thing I would say. And then the other thing that I would say is that, when business puts its muscle behind something, change happens, meaning business can actually help to lead and say, hey, politicians, these should not be political issues. Protecting the public safety, right. Protecting public health, making sure that everybody can vote. These cannot and should not be political issues. And it's precisely because business does have a big voice that I think they have an opportunity and the influence to change that narrative.